Born July 17, 1867. A crafty Texan, stood 5 foot 9.5 inches and he weighed 160 to 185 pounds. He fought from the middleweight to the heavyweight divisions. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, and I would like to discuss Frank Childs' career right here with you on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Let's take a look at Frank Childs' career. Frank Childs' parents, Livingston and Martha, were former slaves who made it from the Emancipation Proclamation, where they were given their freedom. The family settled in Texas in 1885. As a youthful and advantageous teenager, Frank Childs' first recorded ring contest was a 17-round knockout over another black fighter by the name of Davis. They fought near Santa Fe, California on April 27, 1888. Now, Frank Childs began fighting in saloons and smokers and winning accolades as one of the best fighters in his area. Childs' first bow to the sporting public in California, October 31, 1889, with a third-round knockout over another man by the name of O'Neill. They fought on the undercard of Pete McCoy and Ad Coffey. Now, the thing about Frank Childs, he never backed down from anyone, even as a toddler. Something was taken away from him, he would pull it back. And he would give a growling look as he was crawling on his hands and knees. Now, Frank Childs' first big opportunity came February 18, 1892. It was a former one-time middleweight champion by the name of George LeBlancy. George LeBlancy was known for the private punch. He fought non-parallel Jack Dempsey for the middleweight championship of the world. Well, Frank Childs would face George LeBlancy, and I gotta tell you, he knocked him out in the third round because George LeBlancy was somewhat of a bully, if you will. And he would go around in his areas and challenge anyone to stay in the ring with him for 4 rounds. And he would pay him $25. Then the fee went up to $300. Well, when it went up to $300, Frank Childs jumped at the opportunity. And he got in the ring. And he knocked out George LeBlancy in 3 rounds. And the crowd could not believe what they were watching. Here's an unknown who took on the toughest guy in their town. And his name was Frank Childs. Now, May 20th of 1892, he would face a fighter by the name of Australian Billy Smith, fought him in San Francisco, California. These two men actually didn't fight, because when they got there, they both refused to fight because the crowd was too small. Now, Frank Childs would defeat fighters in the colored heavyweight division. One man's name was Bob Armstrong. Now, Bob Armstrong was born September 4th, 1873 in Rochesterville, Tennessee. His family moved to Ohio and Washington when he was 3 years old. He died January 5th, 1933 in Chicago, Illinois. He stood 6 foot 3 inches. He weighed 185 to 217 pounds. He's most famously known for being a sparring partner for Bob Fitzsimmons, who was a middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight champion, Jim Jeffries, and others. But he would eventually become the colored heavyweight champion. Bob Armstrong was also faced Tom Sharkey in several exhibitions. The colored heavyweight champion Joe Butler, Bob Fitzsimmons, Joe Chowinski, and Denver Ed Martin, who was also a colored heavyweight champion. Frank Childs also faced Joe Butler, and he was known to be the king of the middleweights. His manager was Tom O'Rourke. Tom O'Rourke was another manager who took on a lot of black fighters. But Joe Butler was born May 18, 1866, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He stood 5 foot 6 inches. He weighed 175 pounds. And he was in a ring with C.A.C. Smith. C.A.C. Smith was also a colored champion. he would face Jim Damey, Frank Patty Slavin, who challenged Bob Fitzsimmons in his first heavyweight title defense. Joe Butler was also in there with Frank Craig, the Harlem Coffee Cooler, who was also a colored heavyweight champion. And he fought John Banks. Joe Butler, a very good fighter at his time, was another opponent for Frank Childs. Childs would be in there with Jack Bonner. His original name was John. He was born July 14, 1874, in Summers Hill, Pennsylvania. He stood 5'9.5". He weighed 154 to 170 pounds, and he was managed by Bob Deadly. He fought a fighter by the name of Dan Creedon. Dan Creedon was a tough fighter in those days. He faced Joe Butler, Bill Quinn, Wild Bill Hannon, Harry Peppers, Australian Billy Smith, Tommy Ryan, who wound up becoming a middleweight champion of the world. 1898, he challenged him for the middleweight championship of the world. Frank Childs would also be in there with the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. Now, he was born in the British West Indies, March 13, 1873. He died October 8th. He died October 4th, 1935. He stood 5'1", and he weighed 133 to 148 pounds. And he was managed by Tom O'Reilly. Now, Joe Walcott was in the ring with Andy Watson, scored a draw with him. Andy Watson was some tough fighter. He faced Fred Morris, defeated him in 4 rounds, and scored a technical knockout in 3 rounds. He was in the ring with Bob Stonewall Allen, technical knockout in 3 rounds. Tommy West, technical knockout in 3 rounds. A 19-round draw and a 4-round draw. George Cole, another fascinating fighter, knocked him out in 4 rounds. John Sandy Ferguson, Sam Langford, 15-round draw. Most observers felt that Sam Langford defeated the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. But he would also be in the ring with young Peter Jackson, Larry Temple, Black Bill, and Joe Gans. And that would be a 20-round draw with Joe Gans. Frank Childs would face George Byers. He was born June 25th, 1872. He fought in Charlottetown, Canada. And that's where he was born. April 10th, 1937. He stood 5'8.5". He weighed 120 to 165 pounds. He was managed by Tom O'Rourke. And he defeated fighters such as Frank Childs, the man we're talking about today, Harry Pepper, Dick O'Brien, Black Fitzsimmons, Charlie Strong, Dick Moore, George Gardner. George Gardner had challenged Jack Root for the light heavyweight championship, and he became the first light heavyweight champion of all times. He was in the ring with Mysterious Billy Smith, welterweight champion of the world, Sandy Ferguson, and George LeBlancy. Frank Childs would also be in the ring with Walter Easton and Klondike Haynes. Frank Childs would face Bobby Dobbs. Type in Bobby Dobbs Scrapbook Boxing. Just did a profile on him. Fascinating career and fascinating individual he was. Frank Childs was in the ring with Peter Jackson, the Black Prince. He was born July 3rd, 1861, St. Croix, Danish West Indies. He died July 13th, 1901, in Australia. He stood 6'1.5". He weighed 192 to 210 pounds. Now, those who know of Peter Jackson know he was refused an opportunity at the World Heavyweight Championship from John O'Sullivan. He won 61 rounds in a draw with Gentleman Jim Corbett. Peter Jackson, outstanding fighter, one of the best boxers of all times. Perhaps a better boxer than gentleman Jim Corbett, and a better boxer than Joe Joinski. Never got an opportunity to fight for the World Heavyweight Championship belt, although he was the Australian Heavyweight Champion and the Colored Heavyweight Champion. Now he had a cousin by the name of Felix. Felix himself never really got an opportunity. But Peter Felix was some fighter as well. Frank Childs was in the ring with Joe Joinski. November 8th, 1868 was his birth. He was born and raised in San Francisco, California. He died January 24th, 1943 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches and he weighed 162 to 178 pounds. And he fought Jim Corbett several times, Jim Jeffries, Jack Johnson, Peter Jackson, Bob Fitzsimmons, C.A.C. Smith, Nam Farrell Jack Dempsey, Charles Kid McCoy, Tom Sharkey, and Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. Frank Childs was in the ring with Denver Ed Martin, who was a colored heavyweight champion, lost his title in 1903 to the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson. He was known as the Colorado Giant. He was born September 10th, 1881 in Denver, Colorado. He stood 6 foot 3 and a half inches and weighed 203. And he was very strong, very powerful. He was in the ring with Sandy Ferguson, Sam McVeigh, Bob Armstrong, Frank Childs, Walter Johnson, Fred Russell, Mexican Pete Evans. Now what was amazing about him was although he was strong, although he was very powerful, but he was not masculine built. He was a tall, slim young man. But he gave everybody fits. And he earned that colored heavyweight championship belt. But he couldn't hold off perhaps the greatest heavyweight defensive fighter, Jack Johnson. And Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, was another opponent of Frank Childs. And he was in the ring with Sam Langford, George Gardner, Joe Butler, John Sandy Ferguson, Hank Griffin, Black Bill, Joe Jeanette several times, young Peter Jackson, Peter Felix, Fireman Jim Flynn. Now Fireman Jim Flynn knocked out Jack Dempsey in one round. He was disqualified in the Jack Johnson fight for repeatedly headbutting him. He was in the ring with Sam Langford several times. Fireman Jim Flynn. Now Frank Childs was also in the ring with Frank Moran. He was in the ring with Stanley Ketchel. Jack Johnson had faced the same opponents. Ed Gunboat Smith, Joe Walcott, Jim Jeffries, Victor McLaughlin. Now Victor McLaughlin was a very interesting character, very good fighter, but he went into Hollywood, became a mega star, hung up his gloves, and said, "I'm done with boxing." Made a lot of money in his life, better as an actor than he was a fighter. Jack Johnson was also in the ring with Joe Walcott, Jim Jeffries, Sam Langford, Jess Willard, Al Kaufman, battling Jim Johnson, Tom Carler, Jack Thompson, battling Siki in an exhibition with James Tut Jackson. He faced battling Norfolk, Dynamite Jackson, Floyd Johnson. I wanted to give you an idea of the quality of the opponents, the experiences they had when Frank Childs faced them. Frank Childs was some fighter. I wanted to give recognition to Frank Childs. He's another forgotten fighter that will never be forgotten on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Thanks for hanging in there with me. This is Scrapbook Boxing, stating all great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. An incredible victory of Frank Childs was George LeBlancy finally putting his name to bed, scoring 2 knockouts over George LeBlancy. It earned Frank Childs a lot of money in his time. He was in there with some of the best fighters of his day. I just named them to you. Salute to my subscribers, and salute to Frank Childs. He was known as the Crafty Texan. Bobby Dobbs, Frank Childs' opponent. Joe Butler, Frank Childs' opponent. Colored middleweight champion. Fascinating fighter he was. George Byers, Frank Childs' opponent. Fantastic fighter he was.